Hi guys, CP here. Let me ask you a question. This Halloween, who are you dressing up as? Better yet, what is it that a child you know fears most? My best guess is neither answer was a horror film character. That's quite sad to me because the answer to both questions, for me at least, growing up was Jason Voorhees, the bad guy from the Friday the 13th films. It wasn't strictly me either. Some people had Freddy, some people had Michael Myers. The obscure ones went for Chucky, things like that. The point is, they were superstars as far as horror is concerned. They managed to transcend the little small cult community that is horror film and were actually mainstream mainstays. Kids weren't afraid of some imaginary purple monster. They had a vivid image and story behind what they feared. They could recite you things that the character did to instill that fear. It wasn't just, oh, I'm afraid of under my bed. It was, I don't want to go near the closet because I saw in a movie Michael Myers hidden there and got that girl.
I saw it with my own eyes and I can show you myself.
Admittedly, when talking about the superstars of horror, they tend to have phases in which they get very prominent, very big, then things kind of get out of hand, and then people start growing tired of everything. As far as horror is concerned, we're still in a bit of a lull right now. In today's horror, scary movies are associated with a house that's haunted, a camera that picks something up, generic faceless ghosts that magically appear and take on different images to fear. A shaky camera just generically shooting and somehow getting something that pops up and scares you. You're not sure if you're supposed to be afraid, but the noise you heard shocked you a bit. Now, I'm not here to say modern horror is bad. In fact, I think films like It Follows and The Conjuring show incredible promise for the genre. They still lack that thing, however, that gets people recognizing the respective mascots. A genuine villain, an anti-hero. But in horror's case, they'd be considered heroes for bringing it all back to the glory phases. Before I go any further, please note I'm going to start with the sound era of film. If we're gonna have a savior in today's day and age, characters like Nosferatu just wouldn't cut it with their restricted toolkit of the early 20th century. Universal's Monsters was our first true wave of heroes of horror. 1931 was a truly groundbreaking year, as we were handed two pillars for the horror landscape. The first, Bela Lugosi's Dracula, an intriguing character to be the embodiment of why we fear infinite life, with undertones and motifs of sexuality. The stay pure until you're married theme can be traced right back to this character, in leading so many fears about virginity and giving it up too soon, and obviously to the wrong person. Dracula also embodied the pure greed and lust a person could have. He was a true anti-hero, but he had a face. He had characteristics. They were unique. He wasn't just walking around looking scary. He could have been charming at times. He could have been scary at times. There were levels to him, and it was an incredible start to modern horror. We would also get another legendary character in 31 in Frankenstein. Frankenstein was there just to show us why we should fear death and why we should fear the dead. Death in general. He wasn't just a zombie. He was the zombie. For every episode of The Walking Dead, for every last second of a Romero flick, you best call Universal Pictures and say thank you for the world's first and greatest depiction of a zombie, Frankenstein. Frankenstein's actor actually multitasked and gave us two horror icons. Karloff was the actor in the Frankenstein suit and would later end up playing the Mummy. Frankenstein was a big, towering figure that was a walking, grunting reason to fear death. 1941 gave us Wolfman, which gave us another perspective of what to fear, and also a unique twist on the Jekyll and Hyde tale. This was that was a walking, talking character that was as real looking as any image you'd see on a screen, and had us exploring different reasons to fear these intense characters, and even a change of pace for those with differing tastes. We were fearing our own bodies this time with the Wolfman entry. Then in 54, The Creature from the Black Lagoon gave us reason to fear the water. Yes, I said it before Jaws, there was a Creature of the Black Lagoon that gave us reason to kind of be hesitant. But suddenly now we had choices in fear, and that was the best part. We had mascots, we had heroes, or at least horror did. Something you could point to and have your counterpart understand just what it was you were afraid of. Not some generic fear in your head. The folks at Universal were the architects of fear. They gave us unique characters to fear, unique characters to love, not just generalizations of what could be. I'm doing this way too much, aren't I? It was around this time that Alfred Hitchcock started to give us some real scary stories to truly be afraid of. The monsters of the previous generation came off as a bit silly. Suddenly, why would we fear some sludgy man from the swamp? Hitchcock not only gave us great story, he furthered the distance between realistic and a sort of dark fairy tale. Hitchcock himself would be the mascot this time. For over a decade, movies like Psycho, The Birds would give us reasons to fear regular people, or regular animals. Rosemary's Baby later on in the 60s would further extend our fears, without really showing us anything. As far as heroes are concerned, this could be considered a lull in horror. The stories were too realistic. However far-fetched they were too grounded in realism. Thankfully, we started to get the best of both generations in the 70s, taking from the mascot theme of Universal's monsters, and literally hand-picking elements of the Ed Gein story, and just enough to label it based on a true story, 1974's Texas Chainsaw Massacre cracked the concrete wall that had been built by the horror fans of the public. Incredibly, a simple painted-over William Shatner mask would break through that wall. 1978's Halloween featured the mask on the film's killer Michael Myers, and there suddenly was a true star once again. I'm being a bit comic with my comment, of course. The film itself certainly worked wonders in helping create a subgenre within horror, and the slasher film was brought to the mainstream. But sure enough, this mute character was identified by that painted-over Shatner mask, which would now be known as the Michael Myers mask. The main issue that kept the Texas Chainsaw Massacre character from mainstream was the fact that perhaps it was a little too far over the line. The killer's mask in the film was made of human flesh. As a viewing public, we don't mind being scared, but there's a line to what exactly we'll put up on our bodies. It may have been a bit much for people of that day. 1980 would bring us the beginning of the Friday the 13th franchise. The interesting thing about our next star is A, he would not even be prominently featured in the first film of the series, and B, he didn't truly have his image until the third film of the series, where grabbing a simple hockey mask went from taking a successful horror film into stepping into superstar franchise icon. 1984 brought us an incredible new character that was begging to exist. And finally, we had a face to go with the fears that go as far back as humankind itself. The star and embodiment of our dream fears now belong to Freddy Krueger. Nightmare on Elm Street was the stuff of the best of everything that worked so well in horror. We had a not-so-human looking bad guy who existed in a world that wasn't exactly the real world, but in the same breath, he did exist in our dreams, which is a manifestation of our real lives. It was everything you'd expect and or want a horror film to be. Extravagance in showing us that this isn't the real world, but in the same light, it was associated with an act that connected us to the real world. It had a reason to be so extravagant. You were sleeping. It was the dream world, and we all sleep, we all dream. Well, most of us dream. We suddenly feared sleeping. Not to mention we had a keeper of our nightmare. The horror movies were big, but in the 80s, these characters were absolute superstars. At any given Halloween of the mid-80s, you could see a myriad of Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers costumes. Furthermore, kids of the era feared various levels of daily life and associated these faces to go with those fears. Afraid of suburbia? Michael Myers may actually be the star of what you're afraid of. Afraid of a camp or the woods? Jason may be the guy you were dreading. Freddy wanted you to forget his face because your own subconscious could play out anything you were afraid of. However, Freddy was always the star in a nightmare, his home turf. Never mind the fact that he was a walking, talking, anti-smoking ad. Even if you didn't want to think about him, there was a chance that he'd just pop in just for shits and giggles because you associate him with dreams from there out. When horror gets huge like this, as it was in the 80s, minor characters had mild success that would be considered massive success in lull times like we have today. Characters like the Leprechaun, Hellraiser, Chucky the Doll, all manifested certain fears, but were a level below the big three, for a couple of reasons, but it didn't matter. The sheer choice gave these secondary characters a shot. Unfortunately, people got greedy. If these characters were all owned by the same company, it would certainly be worth a shot to try and produce an Avengers-type horror film with all these characters in it, and the film would have no problem making over $100 million. The fact that that sentence is believable is why, for the sake of horror, this needs to happen again. Horror films in general can be good for a weekend win at the box office, maybe a $30 million success. But when you have superstars, heroes of horror in the film, you could bank on multiple weeks of success, doubling your investment, merchandising, and other things that are normally associated with big budget action adventure films. How would you market Paranormal Activity? There's nothing to sell. Getting back to the point, in the early to mid 90s, we were starting to get into another lull with horror. horror. Wes Craven, the very guy who brought us Freddy Krueger himself, tried to reset the trends in horror. He used the reality/character mix again for his next horror icon, but this time he used 2 parts reality to 1 part character. The film was 1996's Scream. The issue with the villain is, spoiler alert, it was not one person in the outfit. And for the series, it was an interchangeable set of villains throughout the series. The structure was strong enough, but we couldn't lean on our hero because, well, they were never the same person. And that too, they were just people. Nothing extraordinary, just people. Lee, you want to tell us about the next lull?
Absolutely, CP. And thank you, good sir.
Thanks for watching, guys. I'm CP with Will I Like It Reviews. Now let's listen to Lee take us to the modern age of horror. Take care.